Hi everyone, this is Maya Good, and today is day 12 of Novel Prep Month. So let's get the disclaimer out of the way because I have a meaty discussion for you today. So, first, I'm not a published author yet. It will happen, it's just a matter of time. And I'm not a writing teacher. I'm someone who has been writing for a long time, trying to learn how to complete projects, how to learn craft. And I failed National Novel Writing Month multiple times before I finally had all the skills necessary to be able to complete it. I'm hoping that these videos will take you from initial idea all the way to feeling prepared and confident about National Novel Writing Month. So the next couple days, we're going to be working on yesterday's assignment, and we're going to talk about different elements of it before we go further. So I'm hoping that your 1 to 2 page outline is going really well. I'm hoping that you're starting to look at your outline and really feel like you're building something. I actually really considered splitting those assignments up, but I thought that might actually make you more nervous. And there's something to be said for ripping the band-aid off and just diving in. And when you stand back and you look at it, a lot of times I feel surprised at this point because I don't realize how much of a story I actually have until I look at the character development I've done and I look at my 1 paragraph summary and I start to really split it up and grow it. And I look at it, I'm like, wow, this is actually happening. And it's a wonderful feeling. Today, what I want you to think about is who you want the reader to have sympathy with. This is especially important for anyone that wants to better their writing, wants to become a writer. If you're doing this on a whim and you're really not interested in craft, then perhaps you can skip this conversation, but I think it still might be of interest because when National Novel Writing Month is over, you may discover that you are actually a writer. So, one of the things that a lot of people really find benefit from is the book Save the Cat. And the basic main idea that I gathered from that book is in the beginning of your novel, you need to find a way for the reader to feel some sort of sympathy, empathy, connection with one of the characters. And it's really easy to accidentally create boring or uninteresting or unlikable characters. And it's a great book. I'm going to put a link in the down bar if you want to take a look or buy a copy. I encourage you to use that link. It doesn't cost you anything, but the affiliate links really do help me out. But one of the things that I found even more helpful was the podcast Writing Excuses. I'm going to include links to the episodes that I'm going to talk about. Brian Sanderson had a wonderful concept that I had read, Save the Cat. I love that book. I learned so much, and I grew up reading plays. I acted. I inherently have a pretty good understanding of 3 act structure and what makes characters just because I've started doing pretty intense method acting and character development starting really young. So it kind of comes natural at this point. But one of the things that Brandon Sanderson said was that he looks at character sympathy as you've got 3 sliders. And by maneuvering those sliders, you can manipulate how empathetic and how attached the reader gets to the character. Now, this character sympathy is different from liking a character. So when you look at your characters, most books, I would say, the reader has an alignment and a sympathy with the main character. But there are books where it's a side character or even a villain. A perfect example of this, I think, is Little Children. It was a book and a movie, and the movie is fantastic. And in that movie, there is quote unquote a very typical villain. And but he is written in such a way that you feel this enormous sense of gray and confusion as you're reading this book because slowly over time you're developing sympathy towards this character, even though he is such a gross and nasty character. And by the climax, you're heartbroken. And I feel like oftentimes we as writers we take the easy way out. We don't actually sit down and think about what character we want readers to be most sympathetic to. So I want you to look at your summary and really think, who do I want the reader to feel most sympathetic to in the beginning of the story? Who do I want the reader to feel most sympathetic to in the middle of the story? And who do I want the reader to be feeling more sympathetic to at the end of the story? It may be different people, it may be the same person throughout. Now, the typically easy way that this is taught is it's all one character. You let the reader attach to a character, and it pulls them through the novel. If you're writing something a little more nuanced, that those alignments and sympathies can change from character to character. But I don't recommend that if you're a fairly new writer. It is much easier to just pick a character that you want the reader to like, to feel sympathy towards, to want to understand more, and follow that character all the way through. Now, like I said, the typical way this is taught is if you've got a character at the beginning, you have them essentially save the cat. So in the first act, somewhere towards probably the beginning of the first act, you have the character do something that makes the reader feel sympathy towards them, that makes the reader think that they're a good person or a likable person. That to me is an interesting thought. Save the cat is so much more detailed than that, but obviously I'm trying to keep these videos under 14 minutes, so I'm not going to be able to go into deep detail on that. If you've never read Save the Cat, I definitely recommend getting a copy. I don't recommend reading it now. You've only got 2 weeks until National Novel Writing Month. Save it until the end. Don't read it during the month because you may sidetrack yourself if you're easily distracted. I mean, obviously, if you have more willpower than me, have at it. But honestly, if I read craft books in November, no craft is going to happen. So what I liked about Brandon Sanderson's idea is that it allowed for more nuance for me. It allowed for situations where maybe I want a character that the reader sympathizes with but doesn't necessarily like. Maybe I have a character that isn't a great person, but I want the reader to feel sympathy or empathy towards them despite the fact that they really don't want to. Um, Maybe I want to change who the reader is feeling sympathetic to. Maybe one character at the beginning of the book starts out as a really good and virtuous and amazing person that everyone likes, and then they do something that just makes the reader hate them, and the sympathies that the reader feels switch to a different character, to a second main character, or even the antagonist. And I feel like Brandon Sanderson's idea was easier for me to visualize when I'm talking in nuance that way. Whereas Save the Cat, it was easier for me to implement up front, but when it came to a lot of nuance that way, I was having a hard time with it. And it's definitely a book I'm going to need to read a couple more times because there was a lot more in that book than I necessarily got off the front. It's definitely one of those books that by the time I'm done with it, it's going to be all tabbed up and underlined. So the three sliders that Sanderson talks about, let me just read it real quick to make sure I got it right. Sympathy, competence, and proactivity. So the idea is, and this is really common for first-time writers, and this is what I want you to look at. Look at your character and look at your 2-page summary. Do you have a character that everything is happening to them? They're not making any choices. Do you have a character that starts out not really being capable of doing anything? Perhaps you want them to learn to be capable later on, like a coming of age story. And it's really easy to do that, where you've got someone in the beginning that isn't really strong, doesn't really make decisions, isn't really a capable person. And the sympathy slider. Are they doing something that makes you want to have sympathy for them, or are they just going through the motions? And I think this is where the idea of saving the cat comes from. So you've got a bad person, but you want the reader to have some sympathy. So maybe you have the bad person do something really good towards the beginning of the book, and then the reader gets the idea that maybe there's more to this bad person than just their bad side. So it's really easy to have a character that accidentally doesn't doesn't have a high aptitude for any of those things. So it's really easy to have a character that doesn't do anything that makes you want to have sympathy towards them. They aren't really competent or capable of doing anything in their own life. They're really just annoying. And perhaps they don't have they're not proactive. They don't make choices. A lot of people that have problems with 50 Shades of Grey, this is what they cite, that she doesn't do anything. She's not really capable of anything. It's easy to get bored with the main character. The death nail to your book is to have a main character that bores the reader. You want a main character that interests the reader. The reader doesn't necessarily have to like them. The character doesn't have to do anything amazing, but there needs to be something that the reader can latch onto. So if you have a character that's really just not a competent person, and that's important to the development of your story, then you need to make sure that the other two sliders are moved over. They need to have something that makes the reader feel sympathy towards them, and they need to have something that makes that they're proactive. So maybe they're not competent, but at least they're trying to make decisions. And throughout the story, you're watching them become more competent or whatever. Let's say you have a character that doesn't make any decisions. Very typical hero's journey. Stardust, Starstruck, Stardust, Neil Gaiman. That character, not really competent at the beginning of the story. He's young, he doesn't really understand what's going on, he keeps falling into multiple situations, things keep happening to him, but he makes decisions. And in the beginning of the story, you feel sympathy for him because you understand his origins. He doesn't understand where he comes from. You understand that he always feels like an outsider, and you feel a little bit bad for him. And at least he's trying to make decisions, and that makes you feel sympathy for him, even though he acts like an idiot sometimes. What are some other good examples of this? I would see, the problem is I don't watch movies. It's so much easier to pull these examples out of the air if you actually watch movies. I would say Sherlock Holmes. So Sherlock, he's not the most empathetic person in the world. His emotions are kind of blunted, but he is proactive, he makes decisions, and he is competent, and that makes you like him, despite the fact that he is an emotional cripple. It makes you feel almost like you're watching me like, oh, Sherlock, like that kind of thing. And it's because he's competent and he makes decisions. If he was an emotional cripple and he was incapable of making decisions, you would either be bored by him or turned off by him. So I want you to look at your story, and if you have a character that everything is happening to them, I want you to add or make sure that you put in something towards the beginning of the book that shows some trait about them that makes people like them. Or I want you to add some trait about them that makes them make decisions. I know my first book definitely suffered from this problem. Everything was happening to this character, and right around 3 weeks into the rough draft, I realized that, and I started adding things where he was making decisions. Even if they were the wrong decision, he was making decision. He couldn't be this guy that, changing his life just happened to him. Finding the love of his life just happened to him. He had to be proactive in some way. He had to grow a pair. And so I made him grow a pair. And that made it easier to feel empathy for him and to like him rather than to be bored by this character. So that's what I want you to think about today. I'm going to put links to the podcast in the down bar. I'm sorry if I repeated things. It's just trying to find different ways of saying things so that if you didn't understand it one way, maybe it'll make sense another. It can be difficult. I find this part of the exercise is really helpful in cleaning up obvious problems with your outline, because it is much easier to fix an outline than it is to fix a first draft. And you're going to have plenty to fix on the first draft. So let's let it Let's let the structural fixing be as small, as tiny as possible. So go through, make sure you have a character that the reader is going to align with, and make sure that their sliders are in balance. You've got 3 sliders. If one slider is over here, the other 2 need to be here, here, here. You can't have all your sliders to one side. And it goes the same way. If you have all your sliders to the other side, you have a character that does everything perfectly, always makes the right decisions, and is like totally awesome character. Then you got a Pollyanna that people are just annoyed by. You don't want a boring character, and you don't want an annoying character. You want a character that pulls your reader in and everyone says, ooh, what's going to happen next? So, ciao.